Well, good morning. Welcome to the live show with Carliner. I'm Mike Honice, training manager with Carliner. I'm here with Scott Simmons from Collision Advice, and today we'd like to take some time and talk to you about blueprinting. And for those of you who have been to the Discover training, you're going to notice I've got my green on today. I've got my wristband, I've got my Game Changer shirt, and we really want to talk about this blueprinting as the game changer that it is. And so Scott and I are going to be talking about it today. We've got some marvelous products here behind us to really show you some of the things that you could do to up your blueprinting game, to really get the most out of your blueprinting process. And if you've been thinking of getting into it, we're going to give you some ideas and some ways that you could really start to get into this. And so, Scott, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time. We know you're very busy with Collision Advice, and I understand you've been on the road almost all year.
Making a good run at it so far this year. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Certainly. So we really appreciate your time, and we'd like to talk about some of the products that we have around us here and what I could do to build my blueprinting bay. And so the very first thing that I would like to talk about is, if I'm a shop and I'm looking to get into blueprinting, where should I start? What should I look at?
Well, from a blueprinting process, you have to incorporate each of your steps in order for it to be organized. Because if what I've discovered is doing a lot of the parts overhaul process that I spend a great deal of my time with Collision Advice is, when you don't have a process that's set up and organized and a methodology, things get missed and forgotten. So what I like to consider is, at the very beginning, we have to consider administrative needs, and those are administrative needs of the file, getting all your photographs taken, but also to get the vehicle to talk to us, we need to perform a pre-scan. We need to get it to be able to communicate with us and let us know what things are broken, what things to look, but most importantly, one of the considerations, European cars, it's very easy to access what's called the build data. For example, on a BMW, if you request that information, you get 2.5 pages of everything that they put this car together. But on a lot of domestic vehicles and through other resources, we don't get that, and the scanner helps to give us what is the equipment on this car, so we begin to know what to look at.
Excellent. So we're going to break into this here, and so I want to get to a point where I start to approach the vehicle with a different mindset, would really be the first thing that I'm hearing there. And so if we step over here, we could take a look at, we've got a couple of examples here. So when I'm going to begin this process, one of the things that I need to do is I need to understand that I need to start looking at the vehicle. And Scott, in our discussion before this, you brought up a great point of, we're really looking at the vehicle's building code.
Correct.
And so just as we would relate it to a building, we want to understand that when we're looking at these vehicles, they all have their own intricacies, they all have their own things that we need to address. And so let's talk a little bit about finding that information. And so what we have here, we've got our scan tool would be one option. I know there's a number of schools of thought on scan tools. We've got aftermarket tools such as this Snap-on. We have our OEM tools. We have our remote diagnostic tools that are out there. And so let's talk for a minute about really what way we would want to go with something like this. So what are your thoughts for a scan tool?
Well, a lot of what I see, and the coursework that I teach, that I have, seems like hundreds of people a month that I get to give me feedback, is that the requirement of the OEM specifications. So what we know is the most recent and current information, the best place to get it is from the OEM. So what my belief or my opinion relates to aftermarket scan tools such as the Zeus product is extremely powerful, easy to operate, fast, does a lot of things, and is really, really good at what it's good at. But inherently, because it's not talking to the OEM, there could be limitations. Sure. So one of the other things that we look at is a remote diagnostic, which is what I have most of my experience with, ends up being kind of interesting because it's communicating through the cloud. And so what kind of happens in that process, if I need to take it with me on a vehicle because the procedures tell me I need to do a test drive, I can't. But we also know if I need to calibrate it, the vehicle itself, we aren't going to invest in the targets at most of the shops, and because the square footage that's needed to drive the vehicle, its distances and the spacing, it doesn't make sense. So they all have,
Sure.
I guess, positives and negatives, but the key to it is making sure the vehicle is functional at the completion of your repair, so as you go to do a calibration with your targets or what the operation, we know that we're not going to get diagnostic charges as well as calibration times.
Sure, and that's a great point, and that we could look into getting into the calibration. And there are some calibrations that may be simple enough to do in the shop, but at the same time, we're going to have to make a decision of, do we want to use that space in the shop for calibration, or do we want to use that for production? And so you're right, there is a definite trade-off there, and so that's a discussion for every owner to have with their staff and with themselves and decide what direction to go. But really, we've got a place for each of those tools, where we've got our aftermarket solution, which is great for in-process repair.
Correct.
Things that I might find. Maybe I've got a vehicle that I'm not sure that it's going to be repairable, and I may be able to just verify some things on it to be able to document it for my estimate. Well, we've got our OEM tool that certainly, when I'm looking at calibration, that may be the way to go. And if I had to outsource that vehicle, if I had to sublet it for the calibration to be done, then that's likely what's going to be used in that scenario. And of course, our remote diagnostics for the things that could be covered and save us the travel time. And so that is a discussion to have, and certainly something that you would discuss in the situation of going into a shop and consulting with someone.
The key to it is in any time that you're writing and estimating and blueprinting process, you want to create non-negotiables. You want to create factual information to where, I like the terminology of emotions. When I say, what is your opinion worth? If anybody's been to one of my classes, your opinion isn't worth jack. It's worth zero, because your opinion is based on emotions. So what I look for in a diagnostic tool, regardless of which of the three, or using the point X and other portions, is to eliminate that variable of emotion. Here's the facts, here are the information. It's one of the quotes that I have on my laptop that I really enjoy, is what we're trying to create, at least in my belief, is we're trying to create, everyone has their right to their own opinion, but they do not have the right to their own facts. And we're trying to create facts in the blueprinting process so that we can negotiate from a position of power or a position of facts, not emotions.
Excellent. And of course, one of the ways that I've talked about the scan tool for a long time is that that's my compass during a repair. So that's going to point me in a direction, it's going to lead me somewhere. And one issue with the compass is it doesn't do a lot of good without a map. And so we've got our map up behind us here, where we've got Mitchell and the Pro Demand website up so that we could get repair information. And so let's talk a little bit about the role that repair information would play, and at what point in the process do I get into researching repair information?
Well, the interesting part for me, and I've got a couple of shops right now that are having great success with it, they have actually incorporated the scan process at the beginning of the repair. As part of there's an administrative check-in, and then they go to a pre-wash and scan as a single location. So pre-wash is accomplished, the clean vehicle comes out, and now we do the scanning. But during that scan, they begin going and researching the OEM repair information at that point. The scan's going to give them some information. What do we need to look at? Because it's going to begin talking to mama and letting us know what the vehicle has as issues. But also, by getting additional build information and equipment, it allows them to go in and use other resources, like the Mitchell product, other OEM subscription to OEM websites, all that information to begin. At their point, that's when they begin pulling all of the disassembly data, the repair plan, the OEM repair specifications of what they identify while the vehicle's in front of them. So you can kind of imagine that person is a little more than clerical, but is not necessarily a journeyman of 60 years experience. It's someone in the middle that is capable of doing the electronic portions, of doing the research, but they pull it from right there. And so before the technician even touches the car, there's already somebody pulling that data.
Sure, and that's an excellent point, where that we need to have that individual with that flexibility to be able to understand the data that they're looking at, to be able to understand its application, and to be able to line that up for whoever will be doing the repair.
Correct.
And in some instances, depending on your setting, I could see that being as someone who might be in the office. That could be someone who's possibly a newer technician.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a seasoned technician who's overseeing it for, I'm picturing a large shop environment, and I need that person with that skill and that experience to be able to set everything at the level where it'll be ready to be addressed.
Correct.
And so we've really got a number of solutions there where we could get our data, and when we're looking at that data, we're going to be able to set it in a way that everyone's going to be able to understand. We're going to have a process for it to go with the vehicle, and we're really going to want to pull it early in order to build our blueprint.
One of the things that's interesting, you go back and you talk, over the last several years, we've been pushing hard on you don't know what you don't know. And one of the things that's interesting is some people could take that as a personal affront. I've insulted you because I've always done this. I know what to do. I'm an experienced journeyman. So it's kind of interesting. I pose this question a lot in the courses that I facilitate. I pose, can a technician be expected to know how to repair a vehicle today? My belief is they can't. But the key to it is if we give the technician training, the tools, we give them the materials, and lastly, we give them the instructions necessary to execute the repairs per OEM standards, they can perform the repairs up to their training. And it's our responsibility as we begin the repair process that we gather that type of information and data to make it possible for the technician to be successful in the shortest period of time possible and not have to have their own learning curve on a new door handle, or what is this wiring harness behind the headlight on this car that they may not have touched. That's why I think it's so important to use the type of technology that you have to be able to get that information quickly.
Definitely. And so there's another piece to this puzzle now as we go on to it, because in recent years we've seen a lot more advanced driver assist systems coming up on these vehicles. We're seeing a lot of sensors, we're seeing a lot of radars, we're seeing a lot of cameras, and all of these things. There's certainly the electrical component to it, and we've begun to address it here between the scan tool and the vehicle information. But there's another aspect to this that we need to talk about. That's the mechanical aspect of it. And so if we take one step over here, we could take a look here at the solution that Car-O-Liner proposes here with the Point X. And so when we look into what we've really begun to refer to this as is a pre-measurement. And so, which sounds a little bit funny because measuring before I measure, but really what we're referring to here is that we want to measure, we want to begin verifying the structure early in the process. And so what are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of pre-measurement and maybe some success stories where someone's starting to see some traction with pre-measuring?
Well, for me, the pre-measuring is back to that point of where they're saying, no, I don't need to compensate, or I don't need to have a vehicle set up and measured. And what's interesting is when you're reading more and more of the OEM repair procedures and you start looking down, one of the things that most of them are saying, it references, confirm the structure of the vehicle is correct before proceeding forward with the repairs. Now, I jokingly say I'm a mere mortal. My three-dimensional, 3 millimeters, I probably could maybe see one. No way in the world could I identify 1 millimeter of variance on an asymmetrical frame rail. So the key to it is if I can't see it, I have to have some type of documentation. So what I feel that we're going to have a trend in the industry, and what I'm really pushing for at the shops working, is to facilitate a method in which we can confirm the accuracy or the need for a pull up front so that we can confirm this vehicle is correct, because we never know when someone else has been involved in that vehicle or with that vehicle, or did it have some crazy chain tie down that tweaks something on the train coming in. We don't know any of those things. So the success stories are trying, this product to me is what I look at, is this tool's ability to be able to make those quick diagnostics. And we were talking about this morning, and I think what I think is very cool is we could even begin to use it to identify, could we need an alignment or additional suspension because of its ability to be able to verify some of those components. I think that's what was, when we were talking this morning,
definitely.
was really cool.
Yeah, and that's one of those things too, where if we turn this around for a minute, where I'm the one who's doing, or the one being interviewed, is that one of the things that we're seeing with this tool is the ability to catch those things early in the process. And so, you know, with this tool, we actually have the ability to do a height measurement underneath the vehicle. And so we could see we'd be positioned our 2-post lift, which is really the way we would recommend using this tool to gain access to the underside of the vehicle. And this particular tool with the inclinometer inside of it will actually pick up my height differences, and so I could begin to do 3-dimensional measuring on the underside of this vehicle. The other thing that we talked about, you know, my experience was I was a structural technician for a number of years, and so last month when we did a show with iCar here at Collision Hub, we did where we spoke about tolerance on the vehicle. And we were showing some of the things where you had to build the vehicle back to how the vehicle was originally built. And so there's an element of making sure the vehicle is dimensionally correct, and that would be measuring to dimension. And when I flip over under the hood on this vehicle, there's also an aspect of centered, leveled, and square.
Okay.
And in that video, we really talked about the tolerance, and so I don't want to go on to that. We'll turn this into a structural show really quickly that way. But our ability with these tools now, and these pre-measuring tools that are available to us, we can really start to picture what way the vehicle goes. And so now as I turn it around back over to where I'm the interviewer, you know, when I look and I get my measurements, we talked about finding facts and taking the emotion out of it. And so when I'm able to show the dimensional, you know, the structural issue where something is off, something is incorrect, what are some of the benefits that we're going to get in terms of creating our blueprint?
Well, what it will do, a couple of things. We always talk about gaps tell the story. So you traditionally look at your fender gaps, door gaps, you look at your different seams, you're looking for where to continue your diagnostic. Again, not wanting to get into the structural, and you're much more of an expert in it than I am, but looking at the cars every day, the vehicles are reacting differently in how the energy is managed to protect the occupants. We're doing it with high strength steels and particular components and different designs to where our passenger compartment is a much safer environment while still decreasing the weight on the cars. So what we've learned is we have to begin to find a way to document how far do we need to disassemble the vehicle to identify that it's not damaged. So a tool that gives us those type of diagnostics means, yes, we need to go look. An example recently was a Mustang hit in the front. This amount of sway that had appeared more severe in the bumper when you looked at it as we disassembled it, but we kept looking at the gaps. If we'd have had this, it'd have been very, very quick. We began realizing we've got to go further because there's something more that we found, and ironically enough, it had moved sufficiently over in front of the engine cradle that it had separated the inner and outer rail at the wheelhouse on both sides. Wow. But when you looked at the outside of the car, it didn't necessarily tell you that story. Where we'd have been able to put it on a post and measure it, we could have been very quick and actually probably not spent the time disassembling that we needed to, because it would have showed us that much quicker. But that vehicle, sadly enough, ended up being a total loss. But that's okay, because it's much better to find it out 100% disassembly, looking at that information, than it is to find it out 2 weeks down the road when you just started to disassemble the car and find out that the customer now has a total loss.
And that brings us to an excellent point, because that's another thing that we were speaking about this morning, is that one of the reactions we found to this tool, and in finding some of these things early, is I do occasionally run into someone that says, we're going to total all of the vehicles. And what are we going to do when we total all of the vehicles this way? And you brought up another thing there, and that's the vehicle that's been there. And so maybe they're not necessarily worrying about totaling the vehicle, but they're worried about saving face. They don't want to have the vehicle on the lot for 2 weeks and then be discovering this issue and then have to accept that the vehicle was a total. So they find a way to work around it. And so, you know, what do we see? What's the flip side of that coin where...
we were talking, it was great. This morning when we were chit-chatting, it was really interesting because what I call them evil spirits. Evil spirits are those vehicles that have come into a shop that certain things have happened to it that have caused some type of a delay. And then they kind of have this feeling that nobody wants to touch them because they're a little haunting, and then they have a bad vibe, and then those just continually get worse. So the key to any blueprinting process and the key to the speed of the repair is you have to decrease the length of time between the vehicle arrival until 100% disassembly is completed. All the shops that I work with, we drive hard on that length of time from keys to disassembly. Some insurance partner relationships have specific time frames. What I strive is to say anything that comes in has to be disassembled within 24 hours. Because within 24 hours, we should have the ability to then know and identify the type of repairs. Is it a total loss? Is it not a total loss? Is it structural repair? Do we have the ability to diagnose and find? In this instance, we do have an airbag module, a power steering module that could be, $1,500, to replace. Can we identify those within the 24 hours? And if we can, we've now allowed the ability to be able to not have any evil spirits. If it's repairable, we manage it. If it's not repairable, it's a total. But in any instance, we can't vary how we repair the car based upon our emotions that we're dealing with the customer or challenges, if that kind of makes sense. It's a fact that individually you have to relate to the car, and it has to be right. And we say, looking at it as far as the building code, is that when we, back to that point is, if we consider a homeowner's claim, just quick story of how we come up with this analogy. A homeowner's claim, when you have the tree fall on your house and your house gets repaired, it doesn't get repaired however somebody wants. It gets, whether it be an insurance company want or a customer want, it gets repaired per building code today. So somewhere 25 years plus ago, we got involved in an instance when our repair process started varying and people started dictating to us how to repair the car, or a technician starts making judgments that they believe are right but may not be correct for what the manufacturer says. So when we're saying, back to looking at measurements, looking at specifications, looking at being able to three-dimensionally determine the accuracy, it's really important to consider that the OEM, the manufacturer, makes the determination by their repair procedures, what is the building code that the car goes back together. And that's the part when we're looking at knowing all of that within that 24 hours of arrival at the latest, we now can manage that.
Excellent. And why don't we step over to the vehicle here, because that brings us to some other points that we were discussing earlier on, and that was, we were talking about the customer experience and how the blueprinting process really has a big effect on the customer experience. And there was a statistic, I found this to be quite shocking, but to me, it explained a lot about the insurance company's involvement in our repair process and the OEM's interest in our repair process. Was that a customer that has a bad experience in a collision facility, 60% of the time does not buy the same make of vehicle, doesn't stay with the insurance company, and on average in less than a year gets out of that vehicle. And so let's talk a little bit about how this blueprinting process will change that customer experience and the benefit we'll see there.
So when you think about it, if you are considering this vehicle, if we were to, in the old school, look at this car and write our bumper, absorber, reinforcement, headlight, slap all of this on and say, we're going to go ahead and order all these parts, but we haven't disassembled to determine anything on the inside. We're going to, as the joke goes, we're waiting on parts. Well, we're waiting on parts, but we still haven't identified all the parts we need. So the interesting part when you consider that customer experience with the manufacturers, their desire to keep them loyal to the car, insurance companies to maintain a high CSI, and for us, most importantly, cycle time gets to be kind of an evil word sometimes when you're out. Everybody's like, it's only insurance companies that want cycle time because they're the ones that are pushing it. But when you think about it, if your car is damaged, don't you want your car back as quickly as possible with the highest quality repair possible?
Certainly, I wanted it yesterday.
You wanted it yesterday.
Yeah.
That's my big joke on parts. When do we need our parts? We needed our parts the day before the accident happened. We're supposed to be omnipotent enough to get everything we need before it even occurred. So when we're looking at that, what I would say is the customer experience of looking and identifying that this is gold versus a charcoal color, whatever it may be, headlights, HID versus non-HID, looking at adaptive versus non, the electronics in the vehicle, all of those are done by touching every single part and disassembling every component during the repair planning phase. There's always a duck rabbit. What it means is you look at something and you see a duck, I look at it and see a rabbit. A cognitive illusion is what it's called. So what that means is between your view and my view, neither one of them are right, neither one of them are wrong. We just look at it by using our Discover Leadership phrasing is the story we're telling ourselves. Your story and my story, neither one of them are wrong, they're just our stories. And so what we have to do is standardize using the vehicle and a methodology and an organization of a parts cart to be able to identify a specific way to disassemble a car. And using the estimating sequence of each of your estimating platforms in a particular order, an OEM, makes a huge difference.
Sure. And you bring up an excellent point. I want to get into the 100% teardown aspect of this, and you referenced the parts cart a minute ago, and I've encountered a number of shops where they're hesitant to make the investment into the parts cart. You know, and we can be looking at a good amount of investment to put it on the cart, and maybe I've got shelves that I've been using for a long time. We've been piling it up in the corner. We've been doing just fine without it. And so really, you know, you were talking about some very innovative things that you do with the parts carts. I know, and I was a technician that I had a lot of things that I did with the parts cart, and so let's talk about the benefit of using a parts cart versus just a stationary shelf or piling the things with the vehicle, or worst case, putting them into the vehicle.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's interesting. There are many direct repair relationships that will not, you know, allow you to have anything in the car as part of their relationship. But utilizing and considering the red carts, as we call them, and you have the reds, you have the yellows, you have the baker's carts, all the various ones, each of them have their advantages. How sturdy these are, how comfortable they are to hang sheet metal, the various, in the back you can see the hanging of the interior trim panels. They're all really, really strong and good, but some customers, the footprint space of these is different than, say, a baker's cart. But if you put away the carts and decide that we just are going to use whatever flavor it is, we're going to use one, the advantages come by creating a circle. I'm responsible for doing a number of the parts overhauls that Collision Advice and working with Mike's outline and a continuous improvement and guideline that we've created as our own. It's really interesting because if you consider you have a parts list and it's written in estimating sequence. So how we wrote it in the estimating platform, the parts are listed in a particular order. If you were to identify on this cart that it is in the same sequence as what your parts list is, this is how we implement it, is that the same sequence, all damaged parts and damaged parts alone are on this cart. We have discovered that the mixing of parts, which was traditional in the prior days, and what we've learned is you mix them, it creates an opportunity for people to stir the stuff and your order becomes wrong. So what we've done is we have all undamaged parts go into a bin, and we locate specific protected locations for interior trim panels, seats, headliners, glass. So those are separate, but we use bins for all of our R&I. So the great part about it is imagine if you as a technician were to be rolled over and this cart would have old part, new part, old part, new part, emblem, old emblem. We take, if we need 5 clips, we have 1 damaged clip in a baggie, it says ×5, and it's hanging with the 5 new clips right beside it, all on the parts cart. If I give that back to you in exactly the same order that you and the writer took the vehicle apart, how easy is it for you to put the car back together?
That certainly makes things simpler.
And the great thing is that circle. Writer and technician, they work together to write a correct repair plan using the diagnostic tools that they need in OEM repair procedures. Parts covers their back and gives them everything on the parts list and identifies anything that isn't on the parts list that's still on the cart. They have your back. Comes back to you as a technician. Now look at the cool part. You get to work, and you talked earlier this morning as a technician, you pre-built headlights, you put fog lights in, you did all this in body to make sure you knew you had everything you needed to reassemble the car. That's magic, because now you became the last portion of that circle, because you just went over everything that you and the technician did. You went over the parts person who gave you the good work, you covered their back, and now this cart rolls into your vehicle to be able to reassemble the car with no delays.
Excellent. And that's really an important thing that you bring up too, because when I was a technician, the way I would always approach my parts cart would be to have all of my damaged parts off of the cart by the time the vehicle went to paint.
Yep.
And if I had any damaged parts remaining on there, that was an indicator to me that I needed to see someone, because something was wrong, something was missing, something that I needed to have wasn't there. And so I would take that opportunity to go and speak either with the parts person or the estimator, whoever was the appropriate person, and find out what the situation was with that part. And I would even go to the extent of build my headlights, build my mirrors. If the bumper had a textured lower on it and it had fog lights, I'm putting the fog lights into it before it goes to paint. And what I found was when I did that, I took my reassembly times to about half of what they were before I was doing that. So it used to be a 6-hour all-day assembly turned into about a 3-hour assembly, and literally about half every single time. So an amazing benefit just from something as simple as rolling a cart in versus working off of a shelf.
Something else that we've discovered that's really interesting, it's kind of one of those side effects that you knew it would make a difference, but you didn't realize how much. Imagine an outside carrier coming in and they want to or need to take photographs of the damaged parts. Looking at your supplement, you're working on a relationship. You're trying to make this the easiest stop possible and do things differently. Imagine if you were a writer with your laptop and you walk up to the parts cart, the existing parts list, even though it might not at that point in time have any of the parts fulfilled yet because it's still getting an authorization performed, there's an ability for that person, whether it's an inside writer or outside carrier, to stand here and look at the part number, look at the information, and write the supplement while they're looking. I suspect you've been in a shop before where you've watched a writer, they say, oh, all the parts are over there. And they go to a pile, and they're trying to dig through the pile to identify what actually they need. So the way I look at it, if technician, writer, electronics and research that we know as the experts to know what's necessary to fix this car per OEM repair procedures, and we make this organized, we're making it so we can communicate in a language that they're easy to understand, because, to tell you the truth, I know they are not as good as we are, because you and I worked as a team. We get somebody else to come out and write and throw them at just parts. They will not write it as well as you and I will as a team.
And that's a really interesting thing. You know, one of the last managers that I'd worked with, she used to refer to it as, let me come out and get a picture of it before it turns into a plane crash. Because she would come out and it would be all the parts would be apart and all over the place. And so the ability to organize everything and have everything there to be seen, that was a real benefit to being able to enhance the writing process, to get through it. Now, one of the things that we talked about earlier was those visual cues and the things that we would see in the shop. And so even just the positioning and the movement and the placement of things throughout the shop would be another element to consider when looking at enhancing a blueprint process. This is for the shop that's got a blueprint process and they're looking to take it to the next level now. And so what are some of the visual cues that we could have out there?
Well, a couple of things. If you're the key to the organization is making sure they have the resources necessary. In an implementation process, it's kind of interesting, is if you give an individual some tools, they will then reach a point where those tools have now limited them and they'll begin to come up with their own solutions. So one of the most fun that I've recently had as far as organization is we've discovered that there are, we always called them Ziplocs because that was the brand name, but they're very lightweight. There's actually some other products. If on the Collision Advice website there's a store and you click on the parts overhaul, we've found some good products in there, and it's through Amazon. They just get drop shipped. But for a door handle, what we discovered is it used to be all the door handle would either go in a bag, and then what did the screws do to the painted door handle? They'd scratch the painted door handle, or they would tear the gasket. So different size bags. Hardware goes in one bag, gasket goes in the second bag, handle goes in the big bag with everything else, and now you have a single bag for all your stuff that if you needed it to build it, to get it to paint, or to test it, it wasn't all in pieces. So when you're looking at the next level is thinking of those things that you face as challenges. So visual, we want to make sure that everything is organized. For example, I'm finding that most of my facilities are moving to a round of shelves 6.5 feet up that have all the bins in them. There are numbers on one side, empty on the other, and the number right below them of where it goes back when you're done. So the visual would be, if it's an E facing out, the number's there. So when we look at those things, each of those steps in organization comes from whatever fits your facility most. The part that I really look at in the 100% disassembly and the visuals, most of my shops that I work with are putting up a sign, and it's very simple. It's an R&I instruction list. It's the most basic way to think of it. We're R&Ing for the repair, we're R&Ing for the safety, and that's the safety of the tech, safety of the vehicle, and safety of the vehicle components. We're R&Ing for paint external, and R&Ing for paint internal. So when you're talking a visual cue, if you think of just those 4 things as you look at this vehicle, it's going to tell you what you need to do as part of taking you to the next level is being consistent so that you and I, technician and writer, know exactly what to do. When we move and get all of that disassembly done and we have our cart, the organizational process and going through the parts procurement and visual production cues are part of the blueprint, but it's the benefit of the 100% disassembly that started. So for me, visual is organization, and that's your duck rabbit. Your organization, my organization. You use bins, I use a tub, you use a Stanley organizer with dividers, I use a baggie. Neither one of them are necessarily wrong because they achieve the purpose of being organized so that if you go on vacation, another technician could come and do what you need.
And that's got a lot to do with it, is that consistency and that streamlining of processes. And one thing I'd like to touch on, because one of the things that I'll hear is that, well, out here, you know, we can't get this because of limitations through the insurance, or the customer isn't interested in this, or, you know, pick your poison. There's
right.
A number of different reasons that comes up. And I think the number one things that I've seen in it is the consistency in doing it all the time. And so how do I build that consistency? You know, what is that going to look like the first few times when I've decided that this blueprinting is for me and this is the way I'm going to go? I'm going to run into some kind of pushback. I'm going to run into some kind of challenge. And so let's talk a little bit about building that consistency into the process.
The consistency is important, but I think approaching it from a certain level. I call it TED. Trust, empathy, and direction. Right now, the traditional way was, jokingly I call it, smacking somebody in the head with Thor's hammer and convincing them, pay me, I have to have this. It doesn't work that way because the people in front of us are no longer the decision makers like they were when, 20 years ago when I worked for an insurance company. I had full ACV authority when I walked into a shop. So if it was a $30,000 repair on a $60,000 car, I could write $30,000 repair. Now, a total loss, I had to have some authority evaluation, but those people don't really exist out there anymore. So we have to be empathetic of that person's needs and understand we have to give them the information, photographs, OEM repair procedures, documentation that those things are being done. So the interesting part of that is as we earn and understand and empathetic to their needs, we earn their trust. The trust is what's key because consistency equals trust. So when you're looking at a car, and one of the things I like, visuals to make your facility look different. I'm a real stickler. I want every wire end taped. One, I know with today's the weather and what's out there, if you are not taping and protecting your wiring ends, you have an opportunity for corrosion to occur. And if you happen to energize the system with the plugs off, if there's liquid in them, you can cause damage to other components. And that's very specific to certain cars, but it is a challenge. So I want, when that car is looked at, somebody to walk up and know, wow, every single one of these wires and plugs are protected and they're up and they're labeled and they're tagged. Because now every single car, when they come into my shop, it looks different than all the other places they went when they're dangling on the ground getting run over. Mm-hmm. So consistency means every time you look at it, that earns the trust. When you're looking at the R&I of bumper moldings, ensuring the bumper moldings are off, always making sure your upper reveal moldings are off. Because it's one of those things that it takes a while to earn that trust back. But we talked about TED, we've only covered T and E. D means direction. So we have trust, empathy, and direction. We understand their needs, they become very expectant and confident in what we're doing, and we earn their trust. When we need their direction to do a pre and post scan that they haven't heard of before, we face an advanced vehicle system they're unaware of, recalibration expense on a blind spot monitor, all of those things that they may not be aware of. When we hand them the information with the photograph and the OEM repair procedures, what are they going to do? They'll just say yes. So the consistency, what you really want to look at is it's right down to, if the wiring is going to be protected, it's protected on every car. If you're going to detrim a door for it to be painted, it needs to be detrimmed the same way every time. If you're going to make your decision of where you're going to end your clear coat, which is what I believe to be one of the bigger challenges we're facing right now, is getting to do what the manufacturers and the paint suppliers are telling us is correct, and that involves a lot of R&I, but we have to get that confidence first.
Certainly. Well, Scott, I can tell that you're full of advice, and it's right in your name there. And we're getting near the end of our time here, so why don't we tell the people where they can get a hold of us here. And so, Scott, if I wanted to reach out to you, where do I look for you?
CollisionAdvice.com. My email address is scott@collisionadvice.com. My telephone number is 703-888-7213, and I cover the U.S. and Canada. I'm pretty busy across both, and I appreciate the time we spent. It really was a good time.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. And for anyone who's interested in getting in touch with Car-O-Liner, I'm Mike Honice, and there's a couple of ways you could contact your nearest distributor. If you need to find out who they are, if you need to find out some more information from us, you can reach me at training@car-o-liner.com. Thank you so much. We hope to see you again.